Alrighty. Hi, my name is Lake. I'm with Your Destiny, and I've got another deck tag for you today. Today it will be DJ and Snoke. This list is a favorite of mine. I've really enjoyed playing it since the nerf to Thrawn, which took away my previous deck, which was Thrawn Snoke. I chose this deck to replace it due to its ability to do a good bit of damage while also using its removal package to kind of mess with, whatever your opponent's deck is trying to do. So let's get into it. So I have the list right here. We're running Emperor's Throne Room for the Holocron package and, the Force upgrades, the synergy there. Spoiler, the second someone sees that you're playing Emperor's Throne Room, they will know that you're on a Holocron deck. That is, if they're a good player. Obviously, you have Snoke and DJ. That's why it's a Snoke DJ deck. You've got 2 Chance Cubes. You've got 1 Force Illusion. You've got 1 Force Rend. You have 2 Force Speeds, 2 Force Throws, 2 Mind Probes, 2 Sith Holocrons, 1 Improvised Defense, 2 Beguile, 2 Entangle, 2 Feel Your Anger, 2 Friends in Low Places, 2 Hidden Motives, 2 in the Crosshairs, 1 Isolation, 1 Mind Trick, 2 Overconfidence, 1 Rise Again. Now, the great thing about a list like this is that a lot of the pieces can be whatever you want. Like, you can move around the removal as long as you keep around, like a 15 plus package. You can run different force powers, just remember to keep in the Chance Cube and the Holocron. You can run different tech pieces. You don't have to run Friends in Low Places. You can run Coercion. You don't have to play Rise Again. I would recommend it, but you don't have to play Rise Again. You can play Vader's Fist. It's all very mobile. Even really, really specific stuff like Force Illusion. You don't even have to run 1 Force Illusion. You can run 2. This is one of the very few decks where you could run 0. The reason you would run 0 is while Force Illusion is a great card, the presence of DJ actually means that the mitigation of your opponent's damage actually results in your own damage, and because Force Illusion does not remove their dice, you miss out on that opportunity. That being said, I like 1. It's a really good card, and I'll get into it more later when I start breaking down the suites of cards, but yeah. Okay, so more about the general overview of the deck. So the idea with this deck is that you have DJ, you have Snoke. You're looking to DJ any of his dice. All of his dice are really good to power action. You can do 4 damage with both of the 2s. You can disrupt for 3, which is actually pretty good. You can discard for 3, which is huge. You can get 3 resources. That's also a big deal. Yeah, the blank's whatever. But and then Snoke itself, strong character. You end up using the focus a lot in this deck, but the indirect can be pretty good too. All right, so now the way this deck is played is what happens is you have your 2 resources for the turn, and you primarily use these for your removal. That's the main goal. You want to be using it on your removal initially, and you want to play a Holocron for free. And if you can grab a resource somewhere, and if you can get a force power into play, sure, you can roll it out. But in my experience, it's actually pretty good just to use your resources for removal at first, and then kind of worry about getting in the force powers later. Now, there's actually a slight exception for Chance Cube. Usually, I would try to recommend saving a resource for Chance Cube if you can, just because if you save a resource for the Chance Cube rolling and you're able to focus it, number 1, you'll have more money for later, which is always good. Number 2, you might even have more money for removal the round you play it, which is nice. Yeah. So yeah, you're using the removal, like I said. And you want to the individual force powers you choose are pretty important, and I'll just go ahead and dive into why I've picked these. So Force Speed is just a good card. It helps with cost 0. Usually you're going to spend all your money a turn. That's extremely common. and force speed's costing 0. In addition to its tradition of doing things like fixing your dice or giving you rerolls where your opponents can't interact. Just stuff like that. Activations where your opponent can't react. All that good stuff. Force speed's good for that. I should mention, by the way, force powers are blue characters only. So if you want the force powers in DJ, you have to use Holocron. All of this being said, DJ is almost always the primary target for your opponent, so that what that means is these blue character only things, it doesn't actually really matter that much, because Snoke is never really that likely to die before DJ. So if you're in a situation where you just have to play a force throw on Snoke, that's probably not going to make him any more likely to die than DJ, and you're just going to have the force throw, starting on the turn you play it, which is nice. Okay, so back into the back into the upgrade suite. So I've picked Force Throw just because, honestly, Force Throw is probably the best force power in the game. The special is just really good. The fact that it does damage, the fact that it removes a die. By the way, that means that when you remove that die, DJ is going to trigger. Big deal. Its non-special sides are not great. The 2 Disrupt's okay, but really you want those special sides. Mind Probe. So Mind Probe's interesting in this deck, at least for me, the way I play it. So I'm pretty fond of discarding 3 from my opponent's hand, which lowers the power of the special on Mind Probe. That being said, even if you do it, it's probably still going to do 2 damage. And it always has, that it's a pay side, but it always has the ability to do that third point of damage. The 2 discard on it, for what it's worth, is strong, and the 2 disrupt has its uses too. The big deal about Mind Probe is this deck can do this thing where, so if you're very late in the game and you identify that your character just has no way to lethal you, and they have 5 or less health, and you have Mind Probe out, just claim. You can just claim. And then what happens is you untap, you draw your cards, you roll in, they do something, claim, kill them. It's a neat trick. Oh, if you want to run all in, you can cut a card somewhere in here for all in. You can do the same thing. You can do it out of nowhere. Super nice. Okay, so that's Mind Probe. I like it. You can also run. I'll just go ahead and mention it up here. You can also run Force Lightnings. For what it's worth, if you run Force Lightnings, I think you actually want to move to Theed as your battlefield. Primarily, well, for 2 reasons. One's lesser. One is that it'll bring more pay sides into the fray, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is that Theed, by and large, is a better battlefield than Emperor's Throne Room. But that trick I was talking about earlier, where you can just claim and do 5 points of damage, that's a really big deal, and I think that the ability to do that alone justifies Emperor's Throne Room. Once you can no longer do that, I think you have to put this aside and then run the superior battlefield. Okay, so I'm running 1 Rend. The Rend is super flexible. I like the Rend for a couple reasons. One, the range sides. Normally, blue lists can't use those range sides very well, but because we're not mono blue and we have a yellow character, we found someone with guns, so not only can that 2 resolve in tandem with DJ's 2s, but that +2 can actually be used with his base sides, which isn't true for decks in the past like Kylo, Snoke. If you roll the +2, that was a reroll more or less. But the real trick is the special here. I like the special. Again, you can catch some of the Voltron large vehicle decks, with Fire Spray or whatever. You can catch them out, and if you've got 4 resources or whatever, you can just blast their Fire Spray, and well, that's it for them. And in the meantime, you can say pay 0 to kill a chance cube. You can pay 1 to kill a force illusion. There's just good stuff. And like I said, while you're not trying to do tricks with that, like you can do 2 points of damage. Remember, it's probably not going to cost you 3. It's probably going to cost you from 0 to 1 to play it with the Sith Holocron Maybe even this Rise Again over here. I mean, hopefully you don't have to Rise Again of Force Rend, but, you know, whatever, it happens. We talked about Force Speed. I think I kind of talked about Chance Cube. Chance Cube's just good in a deck like this. Actually, Chance Cube's pretty good with really any character with an abundance of focus, because they're just more likely to get the good stuff out of it. So even though this deck seems like pretty low to the ground, you know, running Sith Holocrons and stuff like that, along with, you know, not the world's most expensive removal package, it's still nice to have more money. Because, like, if you could draw 3, you know, removal events in, like, 2 upgrades a turn or something like that, you would love to play all of it. You're not really a deck that's like, oh man, I want to hold on to this Entangle for next turn. It's like, no, you don't. You want to use the Entangle that turn, and then you want to just draw again, and then, you know, hit even more removal because your deck is full of it. And that's an important note to note for this deck, by the way. You do not need to hold on to removal. The removal is so diverse in this deck that you should be good no matter what. You know, obviously, if your DJ's about to die or something like that, or, you know, your Snoke's about to die, you have to be careful for the spots that are left in your deck. You don't want to get yourself into a position where you're drawing into dead removal. And if you're playing a game where you know you'll need removal next turn, maybe then you hold on to the appropriate spot color, but that's really just a corner case. I talked about Force Illusion. So I mentioned earlier that there's like an additional benefit to Force Illusion in this list, and that is it has good synergy with this Rise Again. So, you know, someone does their damage to you, and you mill, say, a Mind Probe, or, you know, you mill a Force Throw. That's great. That's fuel for this Rise Again later. All right, so I'm running Friends in Low Places. I just like the flexibility of the card. It's good for protecting your DJ dice from getting removed. It's also good for like stripping Price of Failures from Vader, or discard cards from the mill decks. Just things of that sort. The Rise Again is really good in this deck. I'm only running one because, well, pretty much because DJ himself is not blue, so you can only use it on Snoke. So I don't think it's warranted at a 2. But the 1 is extremely good. I find that it's really profitable to assign at least 5 damage worth of indirect to Snoke. Even very early in the game, just so you can kind of like get that Rise Again ready to go if you draw it early. Because, you know, the catch is if you're not running 2, if you know you're going to need it in a game, you can't really discard it to reroll unless you're in a super emergency. So, you know, if you need to use it early, you need to be in a spot where it's going to be actively getting value, removing damage, something like that. All right, and at the bottom here we have our removal. So mind you, this is all pretty flexible. Yeah, the only cards I would say are not flexible really are, I would never get rid of Overconfidence. I would never get rid of Hidden Motive. And I don't think I'd ever get rid of Entangle. But I think the rest of it's pretty flexible. So Improvised Defense is probably the single most flexible of them. Improvised Deck, you know, Improvised Defense rather, in addition to its usual strengths of being good against, you know, Yodas or decks with just a lot of focus in general anyways, is it does a point of damage too, which is nice. We like that. Isolation's just good right now. There are a lot of character dice that are worthy of zapping. Feel Your Anger I have it as a 2 of in my deck just because I like the spike potential of doing, you know, not only removing that many of your opponent's dice, but, you know, if you remove 3 dice, that's also 3 damage to them, and that's a lot. Removing 3 dice, or even removing 2 dice and doing 2 damage for 1 resource, that's a big game. Oops, what have I done? So, I'm also running Mind Trick. I like Mind Trick for the same reason I like Feel Your Anger. It has the potential to do a lot of damage. The reason I'm only running 1 is Well, there's not truly a good reason. It's more of I'm kind of hedging my bets. Like I could run no improvised defense, and I could run two mind tricks, or I could run no isolations, and I could run two mind tricks. But I like that you can play an improvised defense and claim, and it's still it's still good to go once you can't really interact with your opponent anymore. I explained why I like isolation earlier. And when you compare Mind Trick to the rest of the removal, I don't think it's better than any other removal here. So sadly, that just means it's a one of. But it's really good. And the spot blue that can hinder it, that goes for isolation too. The spot blue that normally hinders it is not nearly as big of a deal in this deck because good opponents, even bad opponents really, are just going to go after DJ first. So Overconfidence, again, the spot blue. Overconfidence is just a good card. There's not really too much to say about it. It messes with the die, it removes another one. It's going to do opponent damage because of DJ. It costs 1. That's nice. We have some of these are pretty expensive. If you get like 2 pieces that cost 1, that's a really good start for a game. Okay, so let's move on to Entangle. Entangle's solid. The spot yellow can be dicey. Frequently one will be dead. But the first one's really good. You remove 2 dice, and you do 2 damage for 2 resources. Sure, deal. It's pretty good. Hidden Motive. Hidden Motive is strong right now. I especially like it against Vaders. A really good line you can do against Vaders, you can, you call melee on one of their dice, they roll in, and it hits melee, and then they power action in, and then you've paid 0 to do this, and now you can use your 2 resources to, use strong removal on it. Like, ideally, or not ideally, but the most likely candidate is Beguile, where you blank one and you remove the other. But, if something bad happens, you could Entangle, you could, if you have an extra resource, and the Crosshairs is great. You really just have all kinds of options there. It's just, Hidden Motive is just good, and the fact that it costs 0 is heavily appreciated. You'll notice that I don't play Doubt in here. I love Doubt. Doubt is a great card. Unfortunately, the wording on Doubt says that your opponent removes the dice if they don't choose to resolve it, which means you don't get the DJ trigger. So, yeah, that's why it's not here. And He Doesn't Like You is not in here, mainly because when I'm playing this deck, I don't really see too many opportunities to just give up a dice, or a die, rather. Force Speed's actually the most likely thing. Oh, that and Holocron when it's not doing anything. Those are really the only 2 things where I'm okay with giving up a die side. Maybe you could run 1, but personally I don't like the idea of 2. And I kind of like everything else I've got going on here more. So now we have Beguile. So Beguile's kind of interesting because unlike Mind Trick and Entangle, it can never do more than 1 damage. That being said, I think Beguile's just in a really good spot right now. I mentioned earlier how it's strong against Vader. The way the meta has shaped out is there are a lot of situations where you'll really only see like 3 dice on an activation. Like even the Voltron decks, they'll play like, they'll roll in, say, I don't know, a Fire Spray or something, and it'll be the Fire Spray die, it'll be the TLT, and it'll be a dorsal. And what you can do is you can remove the TLT, you can blank the Fire Spray, and you can re-roll the dorsal if it's something obnoxious. If not, you just re-roll the TLT knowing you're going to remove it anyways. So yeah, I just like Beguile. Even though its damage output is lower, I think the card's solid. And then finally you have In the Crosshairs. In the Crosshairs is kind of in the same family where you have the chance to do a lot of damage. It can be a little difficult getting that extra resource, given everything you've got going on. But honestly, more often than not, you will have the resources to do it later in the game, where it can be most backbreaking. The fact that it has Ambush is not that big of a deal, honestly, because if you pay 3 resources, you really don't have that much more to do. But it's nice, it keeps up tempo. You can roll in a character, you can resolve a die side. It's all good. So, one last thing I should mention is you could actually run Vader's Fist in this deck. I choose not to, because I find windows to I don't find a lot of windows to play early. I really like this game plan of playing removal and playing a holocron, rolling out my force powers, or paying for a chance cube. Although I guess paying for a chance cube doesn't really count, so forget about that. Because if you pay for a chance cube, you can recoup the money. But that's not true of the other things. And I really like doing those other things. And unfortunately, if I have to pay 5 for Vader's Fist, I can't really do them. Like, yeah, I can play a holocron, and sure, I can play Hidden Motive, but I don't know. And it's, for the record, it's not hard. It's not hard to play a Vader's Fist. All you have to do is power action DJ's resource side, and boom, you have 5 resources. So yeah, okay, so let's talk about an ideal hand. An ideal hand in this deck would be something like Chance Cube and or Holocron. You'd want... I actually like Force Throw a little more than Mind Probe. Mind Probe is stronger, but I like the controlling aspect of Mind Probe, and I like the controlling aspect of Force Throw earlier, and I like the finishing power of Mind Probe later. So basically what I mean by that is, if I'm not going to kill my opponent outright with the damage, I'm very happy to also be mitigating his damage. Which, mind you, can be a lot in today's meta. There are a lot of 3s, there are plenty of 4s, there's all kinds of good stuff running out there. So yeah, I like Force Throw. There's nothing wrong with Mind Probe, though. So you would also want 2 removal spells here. So it doesn't really matter. That's the cool thing about this deck. You just want removal. You're not too picky. Something like this is fine. Actually, to be honest, if you have the Holocron Chance Cube start, which is pretty rare, it's actually slightly better to have one of the 1s than the 2s. That way you can pay for the Chance Cube roll in without missing the opportunity to have to do a forced overconfidence if your opponent rolls too hot. So yeah. The big thing with this deck is you always want a Chance Cube and you always want a Holocron. You never mulligan those. Never, ever, ever. And honestly, after that, it doesn't really matter too much. I would say that if you draw a Rise Again, you should pitch it, because you want that later in the game. You do not want that in your opening hand. It'll get discarded, or you'll be forced into some situation where you have to re-roll it. It's not good. But honestly, other than that, doesn't matter, which is really one of the nice things about this deck. Alright, I hope you enjoyed.